How's it going?
What's up, Integray? How are you today?
Hmm.
How's
Hmm.
Slate Hash?
Shirley Bay Burgay Bugili.
Do I opt? That was an excellent piece of Anchorkin language.
Why, thank you. I've been practicing.
So yeah, thanks for doing this. So I was like, the reason that I started thinking about doing this is that Ollie, after we finished the story, Ollie updated the tree, and I spent some time like walking through it, and I was like, did like a little bit of recording from it because I thought it would be cool to like try to like make like a more, like a video that kind of explains it or something. And I was just
Hmm.
like, nobody's gonna understand this. Like this is like, unless you're like deep inside it, like you don't know. So
I
like
mean, I
I
I
thought,
don't even understand it, right? Like, I mean, maybe
yeah,
maybe other people would have
that's
as good a shot as we do.
that could be. But there's something about like the bifurcated structure of it, like the different branches and everything, that I just feel
Yeah.
like we have this like internal image of it, and we've talked about it a few times. That's really,
Hmm.
really valuable and unique. And yeah,
Hmm.
just the longer we stay away from it, probably the more we're gonna forget about it. So
Totally,
good to
totally.
spend a little bit of time and try to like talk through it a little bit and just
Yeah,
collect some of those concepts. Yes.
yeah. Thanks for suggesting this. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, totally. So do you want to talk? I mean, I guess we're recording this, right? So do you want to like
Yeah,
kind of talk through it at a high level before we jump into this like kind of randomized topics idea?
yeah. I mean, I had a couple ideas. So tell me, first of all, I have about 45, 50 minutes. I don't have the whole hour probably.
Yeah, no, that's
Um,
totally cool.
but if that's not enough time, I'm down to do this again. I was thinking of a couple of things. It would be fun to just recount before we even get into anything, just what some of our favorite moments are, or things that like stuck in our mind or most confusing to
Sure.
us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Why don't you go first?
I was just like reading over it again and like um, the Starkiss prophecy, the man, I just read over that piece again, and I think that's like later on, that was like the piece that I went back to like figure out what the plot was.
Hmm.
And you wrote a couple things like I don't know how to actually. You know what? I can do screen sharing to walk through the tree. Should we do that?
Sure.
Okay. You wrote a couple. I don't remember what was when. It's hard to tell like in relationship when, but like the Neverborn splinter sex siphoning huge sap and creating a human. I think this happened after the part where Lou went down into the depths and like found real humans that were slipping things into each other's pockets.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So then there was the left thread over there is like this kind of explanatory key. It's almost like a stepped back
Mm,
narrator that's like talking
yeah,
more about like, the like ecology of Noose and all these different things. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I think I jumped over because that was such an interesting moment. The thing with the part with the humans down in the
yeah,
deep level of Italy that are like slipping watches into each other's pockets or something. And so,
yeah,
yeah, I want to talk about humans a little bit more, but I didn't want to do it in the course of the narrative. So that's why I jumped over there. And
yeah,
then we started talking about this like Starkiss prophecy thing, which I agree was really interesting.
yeah. That was one thing that I loved. Yeah, that whole piece. How about okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about
Yeah. I
you?
mean, I think we're probably going to end up talking about some of our favorite stuff in the course of going through the more specifics anyway. I mean,
So
I was going to
yeah,
talk about the type machine and the like,
yeah, yeah.
and map Zorzaks and stuff like that. But like, I feel like we're going to get there anyway. So maybe,
Great.
I don't know. Do you want to just quickly, maybe we could just talk about the process a little bit, you know?
Yeah, cool.
I mean, I'm happy to like rattle off like the kind of elevator pitch or whatnot about what we did.
Yeah.
So yeah, so basically, for those of you out there in TV land, if anybody's ever watching this in the future, we got some kind of an art residency that was prompting us to create well, we kind of prompted ourselves really to create a story in this style that we've now done a couple of times, where we trade back and forth snippets of text using a Twitter-like sort of platform. So in this case, we used Mastodon. And the only prompt that we gave ourselves was to deal somehow with artificial intelligence and kind of post-humanism. Beyond that, we didn't talk about it at all. So it became this multi-pronged tree of stories that have like a non-linear time scale happening, where different things are happening at different times. Characters die and are reborn, and it became this very complex kind of world building exercise, I think, which does have a plot, but it's spread out over all these different concurrent overlapping instances. So yeah, that's basically what we did. Is there anything else you would want to add in there for general context?
Just that we didn't, just like our first version of our first story together on Twitter, we didn't discuss the content or the plot or anything until very near the end when we decided to try and do that, which was interesting. We didn't actually do it that much. We just did a little bit and then kind of went from there.
Right. Yeah. Towards the end, yeah, I guess we did start kind of summing things up a little bit, but honestly, we probably only did about 15, 20 tweets after that. So
right.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I guess maybe we should try this randomized topics idea.
Great.
Cool. All right. So I've got a random selection generator, and we've created a list of like 20 or 30 general topics and then hermeneutic topics to talk about. So let me just paste the most updated version in here. I just added the hype machine because I realized I hadn't thought about it when we were talking about our favorite elements. All right, and rolling the dice. Random selection says anchorkin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so anchorkin are interesting. Anchorkin are, maybe I'll go first on this one, and then you can go first on the next one or something.
Sure.
Already rolling off the tongue.
Yeah, so it's kind of fun game mechanic. Like we'll random you, random me, random you. Yeah, great.
Yeah, and we can each weigh in on both topics. But so the way that I saw anchorkin was that they were these creatures in the way that creatures is a topic that's complex in this. Like, what is a creature? What is a life form? But to whatever extent there is a life form in the space of Noose, which is the world of this story, Neverborn. They are creatures of some kind. They have some kind of like consciousness, but they're closer to animals in some ways to humans. They're kind of semi-sentient forms. They do have a language, which they speak once, I think. But yeah, generally they don't speak very much. They're kind of considered to be these unidentified like spelunkers. They're known. They're described as at one point in the base level of Noose, like the kind of general consensus reality. That they come from a different part of reality and they're down there on these on this mission that nobody really quite understands except for Fullborn a little bit. And they have threads that tether them up to a higher Noose level, which is the future, I believe. And it turns out later on in the story that they're actually also agents of the antagonist, who's known as He, and his like kind of army civilization called Velus Abonamine. So yeah, that's kind of what we know about them, or what I know about them. What do you think about anchorkin?
Yeah, that overlaps a lot. I mean, I've thought about higher Noose as not being the future in as much as it's more like more stable levels of reality, or more like normal reality. It seems like the future, but it's a mistake. Was one of my plot ideas, was that actually it's that it's more like a multiverse where so you've got all these different levels, right? So you got alts, but then you also have a whole other orthogonal level of Noose levels. And in my cosmology, Noose is manifestation, like agape or feminine energy or form, and the one is emptiness or eros or masculine energy or lack of formlessness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, I love those mappings that you're doing onto Greek cosmology. I'd love to like hear more about that. But yeah, that's interesting because I had this really clear image in my mind that that Noose Levels had something to do with consensus reality building itself based on future projections from within the generalized machine intelligence that's able to construct reality at all. So like that's where I was coming from. That like Noose Levels are kind of building themselves all the time, and as the kind of like author level sort of entity understands what it's trying to build, it actually becomes realized in the minds of those in the present. So you can go, if you're a Fullborn, you can go back and forth through Noose Levels because you can kind of access through the Eternal Edge or other modalities, ways of identifying what the future is going to be because of its current construction. So anyway, that's how I was
Yeah.
always about that.
Well, let's talk more about this, because I feel like this is one of the central, like, interesting cosmologies to this whole thing. So
Yeah.
we can come back to the Ankorkin, but yeah. So like Noose, the sap, right? So from the very beginning, we have this tree, and there's this sap ritual that's happening, and I
Mm-hmm.
kept coming back to that and like thinking, what's happening there is about entropy and extropy. It's about the so this goes into like, where is this world? What is this world? Like, how does it relate to our world? And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that it felt like a post singularity world, right? Like after everyone's
Right.
uploaded themselves, and then the seal gets broken, and then everybody's minds
Mm-hmm.
get scrambled, and it's like the new world rising out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that world, like, how do you create identity boundaries, and how do you like have agency, and that's kind of where the Noose comes in. Like the Neverborn's power is like by milking the trees, they were getting the sap, which was basically anti-entropic, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the more like stability they got from that, that would allow you to get higher levels of Noose. So like
Mm-hmm.
lower levels of Noose are just like chaos, like
Right.
there's a leprechaun, and then there's a dead dude, and then there's
Yeah.
blinding light, and then my feet
Yeah.
hurt, and it's like
Right. Right. Right.
totally. But then at higher levels of
Yeah.
Noose, it's more like stable, old school reality.
Yeah. 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 That's really interesting. I mean, it's weird that we could both go through the process of the story with this basic disjunction in the way that we think about things, and yet it doesn't really matter. Like it still plays out in like a way that's like tangible to some extent. Yeah, for me, lower Noose levels weren't randomist. They were the past. They were the lost
Uh,
past. So
uh,
like, there was this constant churning construction going on, which is this kind of, sometimes it's like shale or like slate or calcite. It's like this
mm,
material that to me was maybe digital or maybe material, maybe kind of nanograde material or something that was always being built. And if you burrow down to lower levels, what you were doing is you were finding Arcana. You were finding like the lost past that was
uh,
before Cool Button. And was just so mixed up, and it was so crazy that it was like you described. It was this chaotic,
yeah,
much more kind of like caustic in some ways, like version of itself. So yeah, maybe there is some alignment there in some ways between like past
yeah,
and chaos, in within this like
yeah,
general vision. Because I would imagine that if there is an authorship component, the future is being built with some kind of telos toward, maybe greater unity or something that's, non-entropic or less entropic.
yeah. Arcana was really cool. Like one of the ways I thought about that was it's kind of like um, the sentimentality, or the semiotics and the power of symbols or magic, in any kind of interpersonal space, because they
Hmm.
become like the non-human archetypes of
Right.
a previous world. They
Yeah,
become fetishized,
totally.
but also powerful because they hold power in some type of arcane way over consciousness.
Right. Yeah, it felt like we were definitely in alignment about that. Like there
Yeah,
was like a lost language of humanity that was
yeah,
like of interest to Fullborn more than Neverborn. And
yeah,
Vlus and his Splinter Civ like held them in
yeah,
great regard. Their entire their great tome was constructed out of these like combinations of the 800 Arcana they had located or something
yeah,
so far. Um, and yeah, totally.
yeah.
I love that
All
part
right,
too.
let's do the next random guy.
Okay. All right, let me see. All right, man. We have got language. So that's one of the general concepts.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was just really fun how these like different languages sprouted out of this: the Integration language and the Ankorkin language. And I feel like there was another language too, but maybe not.
Well, there's the Arcana was kind of like a language, I guess, but
Yeah,
in its
yeah,
own way, it was more like a symbolic, matrix.
yeah. And Integration. So I really like conlangs, or constructed languages like Tokipona, and there's a few other ones. They're really beautiful. Like Tokipona only has 123 words, but you can express basically you can have full conversations in it, but it's designed in order to create a, using the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that language constructs thought and being. So like
Hmm.
if you create a new language, then you have a different mode of consciousness.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about that in making the integration language, like what would their consciousness be like, and then thinking about Sanskrit, which has no nouns. So
Hmm.
like a chair is chairing, like it's
Hmm.
like everything is a process, a movement. So it's thinking
Hmm.
about, instead of thinking about nouns and verbs, thinking about like processes and identities, and how
Hmm.
how that type of framing could support a new method of neverborn consciousness.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, I loved it when you dropped that in. It was really like it felt like it was coming from a really deep place of like desire to elaborate the Fullborn's ontology and the Fullborn's kind of like what their kind of like missions are and the way that their philosophies work. So it was really useful for that. I mean, it wasn't, you had been talking about like these concepts that for me were they weren't always very central, like the eighth shape, the eightfold
Mm-hmm.
shape, and things like that. And then I really started to understand them when you dropped in the integration language, and I started to be able
Oh,
to like pick through them and kind of use them more. And it was a really good way for me to like figure out like the mentality of Lou and the way that that Neverborns might think about their own agency and what they're doing, what their goals are. So yeah. So yeah, I mean,
cool.
like, what was the eightfold shape? Like, I feel like that was something that you brought in with like a lot of like, kind of forethought, or there was, that was kind of your effort to some extent.
Yeah, that was another like mission of mine.
Yeah.
I feel like, when did the shapes come in? Okay, so it happened like everything in this story for me. Um, from like an accident of poetic language, or like a kind of glimpse at something, and then later trying to go back and find some like anchor in this story, So in my second, or I think it was my third toot, Lou was real, dipped by the shores of the loom, and integrator of the eighth shape and holder of the slate hash. Like I just thought that sounded really cool, at the
Right.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it like constructed a bunch of things for me.
Hmm.
And then what was amazing is that through the rest of the story, I got to go back and mine these things, that
Right.
had like no meaning at the time,
Yeah.
but create like full, deep backstory to these random weird things. So that's where the shapes came
Hmm.
from. Yeah,
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, it's a great world building tool. Really, it's
yeah,
like just negative capability in a way. Like, just these, you stumble over these things that have this poetic, kind of liminal meaning in your own mind, and then you end up understanding them, over the course of just writing about them more.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, the eighth shape was so interesting. And if my understanding of what the eightfold shape was that it was a sort of like it was like an ethos, or like a kind of way, it was like a way of attaining higher level consciousness that only fullborns could do. And it's baked into their powers. That was like where most of their kind of superpowers came from.
Yeah, pretty
Do you
close.
have
But
any? Yeah.
yeah, just want
No,
to
I was just
talk
gonna
about.
ask if you had. Good.
You go.
I was gonna ask if you had any more insights about that, or like, how did that work into the like, maybe the question that's on my mind mostly is like, how does that work into the kind of post-human, maybe AI-based world that's in there? Like, how do those two
Yeah,
things connect?
yeah. So that's a great question. Like for me, let's talk about Fullborn and Neverborn and Proces.
Yeah.
So like what types of beings exist in this world? And
Mhm.
I actually have never been fully clear on that. Like to me, there's a difference between Proces are kind of like lower level um, consciousness entities, lower consciousness. Maybe like, are you there? You look frozen.
Yeah. No.
Okay. Um,
Still.
like lower level beings in this kind of post reality world, and then Fullborn were kind of like the masses. They were like, beings that were like actual full life forms that were born into that world and die. And then
Hmm.
Neverborn were like even beyond. They were like superpowers, or like I was imagining never like a fullborn would be kind of like a human, but a Neverborn was a little bit different. Like a Neverborn was born as an emergent process from this new reality, not like through some type of evolutionary process as we know, as like another level of consciousness. So I was trying to think about like, trying to understand that in the story, I was trying to think about like, well, what would their consciousness be like? And I think that plays into the shapes, like meditative levels and like insight beyond anything we could understand, you know? So a lot of that was trying to puzzle that out for me. Like the, just want to go through the shapes really quickly. That list. So the shapes are grouped into 4 sets of 2. The first shape is non-duality or open energy center sensing. So and the second shape is fluid identity, open energy center movement. So I kind of try to take the beginning of this ladder of experience to be like the highest level I've seen in the world of attainment, you know, like full non-dual, like ability to perceive the world from a total unitary consciousness. That's just the first shape. And then the second shape is the ability not just to sense it, but your identity moves through that space, like shape shifting or like becoming other creatures or other beings. Like your identity is super fluid. I'm going to go, I could take a long time. So I'm going to go kind of quickly, but then the next 2, 3, and 4 is clear body sensing and clear body movement. Which I don't really remember what those are. The 5th and 6th are noose level sensing and noose level movement. So you could sense what level of noose you're at. And then the 6th one is to move through levels. And then the highest powers are 7th and 8th, which are alt sensing and alt movement, which is to be able to move through total multiverse levels, basically.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's, one of the takeaways from that to me that is really interesting is the way that these things that sound like spirituality, or they sound like, mystical levels of attainment, as you described them, are kind of easy to bake into like the general structure of a post-human system. Like if you imagine that there's like a information-rich kind of self-perpetuating, authorship process that somebody could potentially tap into, that like, not that those levels are easy, like you still would potentially need to have like really high access levels or like something like that.
Oh, will you start your video again, Max? I want to freeze you.
What happened?
Will you start your video again? I stopped it because you were frozen. Okay, you're back.
Okay. So it kind of lost my train of thought, but essentially just, it's interesting how mystical sort of processes that sound like superpowers in our reality are much more attainable when you use the framework of like a artificial, simulated kind of like AI, AI-based, reality space. So yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted the video for the recording.
No worries.
Yeah.
Should we do another random pick?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let's see what we got. Oh, we got the 8th fold shape, so we kind of just talked about that. So I'll go again.
No. Well, give yourself another one.
Yeah. Material. Okay. So material for me, I think I already sort of mentioned this, but it was definitely a thing that did not have a right or wrong answer in my mind. There was some potential that Noose reality was built out of actual physical fundament in my mind, but there was also the same level of potential that it was all just a digital, kind of like a digital space that's only really managed by its own computational principles and programmatic decisions that are made in some kind of artificial space. That's basically how I thought about it. I mean, there was a lot of like particular kinds of material that we would talk about from time to time. There was like calcite and shale. There was, nano was discussed quite a bit. And to me, I think what's important about that stuff is just its porousness. Like I felt like, and this was true in IWE too. And I feel like it's almost just like an aesthetic conceit maybe, or an aesthetic sensibility when talking about these spaces. But that there was a general porousness, that nothing was really ever truly solid. Everything was always kind of a mesh, or like something that had identifiable spaces through which, you could slip through to whatever was behind it. Yeah, that's really all I got on material. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that all sounds right to me. I guess I thought you were always doing interesting things with materials and introducing things like calcite and shale, and I was like, I would be like, okay, well, what do these mean? Like, what do they?
Yeah.
How does that relate to the story? And like, so that was something I enjoyed.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah, like when I would talk about stuff like that, it was never definitely about like, does this have like an actual, sort of empiric value within the system? It was like, not really. What its importance was, it was just another layer that could always be peeled
Yeah,
back, right? Like you could peel back
yeah,
calcite in a tree to get at the sap or something, right?
yeah, yeah,
So,
exactly.
I think, so it's a little different than like our consensus reality, than our physical reality, in that,
Yeah,
some objects are just inert and timeless. Within Noose reality, it seems like every surface is just a surface that sort of hides like a greater complexity beneath it, like a really deep
yeah.
hermeneutic.
In this world of Neverborn, which I guess is the name of the story now, although it could be a different name too, if either
It
of
seems
us,
like it's settling in. So yeah,
yeah, um, is that like it's magical, like all the materials and everything has a little bit more like juice, than like normal consensus reality, which I liked.
hmm
So like the Arcana have like this kind of magical symbolic power, and like materials also had it. But like you said, I think materials were in a way like things we could in the future, or other people can go in and create more backstory around and weave them in. They're like a doorway ready to be woven in.
totally. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's true for almost everything in Neverborn. Yeah, like actually that brings up like another thing that I think was like an example of that I thought was really interesting, was we spent quite a bit of time like talking about this weird cinematic level within the tree. It was kind of like
Mm-hmm.
early on when we were really deep into like, what's the tree, like what is Lou doing with the tree. And that was actually one of my favorite parts in some ways. It was like, I thought it definitely plays into this idea about magic and like what the ownership of magic is, or the operation of magic in this space. There was yeah, so this whole area that you're finding here, where Lou is like messing around with the sap in the tree or trying to create some process to happen, and part of it is that she needs to instantiate a space of cinematics, where it's almost like she summons like an entire like history of film or something, and starts using that to then make some kind of like an interaction or a moment of greater agency for herself, by getting these two characters to have this very particular outcome, where they have like a kind of intimate moment, and then they devolve into this like kind of like Lovecraftian like horror. So yeah, that was kind of cool, and it seemed like that was kind of like what she does, like that's like talking about this deep hermeneutics that's underneath things. You go into the tree, you're dealing with the sap, and then you have to construct an entire history of cinema so that you can make this one thing happen that then shifts chance somehow, or interplays with chance. Oh, you're on mute, Jamie.
I had a theory around this and I've forgotten it now. But yeah, there was something like what I really liked is that how it manifested differently, like the Derek and Shelby thing manifested differently in different threads.
hmm
Like in this thread, I don't remember where it started. I think this is where it started. Um, filmic histories grew and spawned, and then I put this in this weird Shelby thing, and like
yeah.
just changed the script totally, right?
Right,
And
right.
early on in the story, like one of the things that was really interesting to me was like trying to totally change the paradigm as we were going.
hmm
Um, so this was one of those movements, um, and then I liked how it manifested differently over here. Like you wrote this poem about Shelby and Derek,
Terrible
and it was
poem.
like it was I love this poem. It was like almost like this like I think it really gets at something profound about the nature of reality, and like we're writing a story in a multiverse, and it's like
hmm
in one alt or one thread, Lou is draining the sap, and as part of that this whole other world happens, and this other thread, the echoes of that are still coming through, they're all tied together, but it manifests in different ways,
Hmm. Yeah, totally. And I think it also like kind of points a little bit at synchronicity, right? That like one of the and this is less tied to the sort of like mystical eighth shapes than it is just to like their kind of almost like vocation. Like one of the things that Fullborn seem to be doing is messing around with synchronicity and trying to manifest like a poetics within the tree for some reason. And it's
Yeah.
not really clear
Yeah.
ever like what their goals are, what their aims are. Like it almost seems like it's just part of their like, sort of vocation, like a mindless vocation.
Do
But
you
that
mean
seems to,
Neverborn or do you mean Fullborn?
oh, Neverborn is what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Fullborn, yeah, definitely don't seem to, we don't really get into like what they do all that much.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. You want to try another random seed?
Yeah. Do it.
All right, looks like we got like 15 minutes left or something.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can get. Pull it out of the Arcana. Well, we got Neverborns again. Do you think we've talked about them enough to want to move on, or would you want to dive further into them?
Yeah, we can move on.
Okay. We got Arcana. Do you want to put Arcana more?
No.
Yeah, I agree. The Tomes. That's a pretty good one.
What are the tomes?
So the Tomes were Our Hour and Hymn's Way, the two
Oh yeah.
books.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember in IWE there was a book that was fun. I forget what was the book that we wrote about in IWE.
I have a vague memory of this, but I can't. Was it the Whelk? Something the
The
Whelk dealt
the
with?
Welk's bio. The Welk's
The Whelk's
bio.
biome. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So then yeah, I kind of thought about the tomes in like that. Like I like the idea of expanding it more. Like so here are these famous historians of this world, and then I liked how um, later they became characters. Like at the time of like talking about the books, it was just like a one-off toot, but then we kept playing with that stuff,
Hmm.
and ended up using them as um, really interesting mechanisms in the storytelling.
Hmm.
So right, there's Himroy, Himini, right? And then
Hmm.
there was Glusabamini. Those were the two. There were the
Right.
Him's Way and Our Hour, right? Yeah. So
Right.
those are,
Right.
and those were like kind of good and evil. It turned out later, right? Like Himroy was kind of good, and Glus was bad. It was evil.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. I mean, like, depending on how you think about ethics within the space, but like, yeah, like, definitely. So yeah, Hym's Way was kind of like it was maybe more aligned with Neverborn, and Our Hour was more aligned with Fullborn. Our Hour, I think, was a catalog of all of the a deep, very deep catalog of like treatises based on the Arcana, and Our Hour was just like there was like a Neverborn, like a very old Neverborn or something called Himroy Himini,
Yeah.
and he had at one point written this book, and they were both like deeply invested in these two different like kind of theologies sort of or two different like religions almost. So the Luce Abamini, the Splinter Civ, had authored R, and it was very beholden to the Arcana. That was like what they trusted in and thought was the most important kind of like linguistic substrate. And then Our Hour was invested in the one and the eight
Yeah.
shapes, and would often bring back discussions towards that as being the most important thing,
Yeah.
or the most
Yeah.
most powerful and highest. And at one point, the two dictionaries or the two books started arguing with each other. Right? We had like this like
Yeah.
little like this little like debate, like flame war between
Yeah.
like Our Hour and Hym's Way.
But then I think Himroy gets killed.
Really?
Yeah, I think
I
so.
wouldn't be surprised. I mean, like, did he get killed as like an ending of a thread, or was it was just talked about him getting killed, like in
Just
the?
no, he dies in one of the alts. He dies.
Oh wow, I don't
Yeah.
remember that for some reason. But I'm sure, like, often endings, like when somebody got killed, it was just this like
Yeah.
mad rush of like kind of like death and like destruction, like something
Yeah.
crazy
But
happened,
just
and I
come
would
out of
forget all
nowhere.
about it. Yeah, like I
It was
wouldn't
like
think about it anymore.
yeah.
So yeah,
Right. It was like a choose your own adventure. Like all of a sudden,
yeah,
like you turn around and was like, and he walked into the well and died. It was like
right.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
totally. So if him died in the course of one of those things, I would very well could have just
Yeah.
forgotten all about it right away.
Yeah, but here we can take a second. That is a weird moment when the two books are arguing. So I found it in the thread. So it started. Okay, so it's at Zorzak's, and then one of the threads. Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is like I wanted to. Oh yeah, so Himroy writes this. I wanted to like put in a dictionary of the language, the integration language. So I did that as a split, as a fork here,
Right. All right.
and then and I did it as Himroy because I made
Right.
an account for Himroy,
Right.
and then what happened is I think you created our
Right.
and you replied here. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I felt like if Hemorrhoid was going to have this whole like presence, like our hour had to have it. You know, I had to like bring in our
Yeah.
hour and kind of like take
Yeah.
umbrage to some of the things he was saying.
Yeah.
So yeah. Then
And
he
then
brings in he's like, look, we also got the Arcana. Like, here's a bunch of
yeah.
examples. These are clearly much more, valid than whatever the one is. So yeah. Yeah.
And
It
then
was fun.
there's like a weird portal over here. But then
Oh, yeah.
here is when he dies.
Oh,
Like
okay.
now they get into a real flame war. And then yeah, see, of course, with your true self having perished in a tangled cordyceps blast orgy some 30 seconds prior.
Okay. Right.
So
That's it. Yeah.
so our
So it
kills him.
wasn't like he died. It was like he's been dead for a long time, like his true self.
Oh,
And this is now, anyway, that's how I was thinking about it. And,
no, maybe.
when the two dictionaries are,
Yeah.
sort of like flaming each other or whatnot, like they're
Yeah.
not actual entities anymore. They're just dictionaries. They're just doing whatever they're like.
Right. Exactly.
They're just arguing by themselves the way that a, AI enabled dictionary might.
Oh, there's one thing I wanted to put in here, which is that whenever I made an account for somebody like Lou or Himroy, I put a riddle into the Mastodon page so you could guess the password. And I
Oh,
was
really?
hoping, yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
I was hoping that somebody that was reading, one of our two readers, if there
Right.
are any other readers, would like start like figure out the password and start tuning.
Oh God, that's crazy. So even your primary account, or just the
Not
kind
my
of like ancillary?
not
Yeah,
my account, but Hemroy's account. Here
that's
I
cool.
can show you.
Wow, in some alternate universe, Fullborn are scrambling over each other to try to figure this thing out.
Yeah, so here's Hemroy's account page. The password. So I made a field. It's password, and that's the hint. What Dawn was.
Oh, that's so
Um,
easy.
well, for us, yeah.
Yeah.
Try not to make it too.
That's pretty cool. I hope somebody jumps in there and starts like fleshing out Hemorrhoid's, thoughts.
Yeah.
Although he's dead, he died in a corticosteroid explosion or whatnot.
He seems capable of speech still, and Lou's account also has a hint, so you could also
Oh
become
wow.
Lou if you wanted. Yeah.
Oh yeah, lose account. Actually, that was a whole wormhole of madness. So
Yeah.
at some point you started tuning as Lou, and you kind of broke the fourth wall, right? She started talking to us, to like,
Yeah.
the author. And actually that played into the Starkist prophecy a little bit for me too. I think I was
Yeah.
really thinking about that a lot when I started being like, what are humans? Like, are humans like us? Is that like, are they, these kind of authors outside of Noose? Or are they all dead? And are they, lost within Noose? Or do they get, the Revenant? Do they come back somehow? So anyway, but yeah, Lou was like, so she would come in and she would talk, but then she would create this like kind of weird, that would create this like kind of static or something. Like sometimes you couldn't really understand what she was saying.
Yeah.
It was a cool effect. Yeah.
Yeah. I found basically they're called combining diacritical marks that allow you to like fuck with text and anything. There's a cool tool. And I was doing that because I wanted to make it like she was trying to talk between alts, right? She was like some instance of herself outside the story, and
Right.
she was seeing how he, or the Blue's guy, or Blue, was killing Lou because the bad guy, I'm gonna call him Blue because that's what he says at the end.
Right.
Blue was stealing the sap from all the Neverborn's trees. So Lou's sap was being stolen, and that's what was causing the explosions and stuff. And like the weird Derek stuff is because the trees are very fragile, and you can only milk them a certain amount. And so Lou
Mm-hmm.
thought she was, had enough sap to milk, and there wasn't enough. So they were going like super critical, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what was killing her. And so
Oh,
this other
interesting.
Lou was trying to warn her, but there's too much interference, and that's why you had that weird text.
Oh, wow, wow. So then at the end, though, like Zorzax ends up reuniting the Lus. That's like kind of like
Yeah.
how he's able to get Lu into the Splinter Civ, right? And
Yeah.
is by reuniting all of her forms. So I think at that point we kind of like did some work and some portaling and tried to collect her out of all the trees she was still alive in back to,
Yeah.
I guess, what ended up being like the primary thread,
Yeah.
so that she could do that. So I guess that maybe she was conscious that this was an issue in one of these, secondary realities or one of these alternate realities,
So
and was trying to do the same thing, but she didn't have enough power. But then, Zorzak Zenmath with all his gargoyles was able to do it,
yeah.
and create some kind of summation or closure to the story.
Man, there's so much more I want to talk about. We have to schedule another of these for next week.
Let's do it. This was a really good. I
Yeah.
think this was a really fun way to do it, actually. So yeah, let's do it. And when we feel up to it again, I think this was rad.
Got a few more minutes. You want to take one more hit off the pipe, the random
Yeah,
pipe?
man. Let's do it. Let's see. Okay, this is actually a pretty good one to end on. So, general concept, time.
Hmm.
Am I up? I can't remember if you went last.
I think you're up. Yeah, I think.
Oh gosh. Okay. Time. All right. Well, we've already talked about time a little bit, but yeah, for me, there was definitely a linear progression of time, but there was a more. I don't really want to restate what I said before, but basically just that, like, because there's this level of authorship going on in reality. Reality is aware of its own future implicitly, and I don't think this might be true anyway. A lot of people think this is true. And Neverborn and they're able to cross between Noose boundaries are able to ascertain the future because it's already becoming present in consensus reality. So that's how time works. And I guess that to the extent that people can travel back in time, that actually seems more challenging to some degree. I mean, some of the Neverborn, like Ted, was able to go really far down into lower Noose levels. And I think when he was doing that, all it meant was that he was able to sort through archives really effectively, which, because things have become so complex post-Cool, is a very challenging thing to do. And I think that's talked about a little bit. And he's able to get down to Noose levels where there's some coherence to the general chaos of, this churning lost history of human language and all the different phases that happened leading up to the singularity. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got on time. What about you?
Yeah, I would just say, like, I like thinking about this as like, there's so many dimensions to reality in this world. Like, there are different Noose levels, there are different alts, there are different threads, and it's not clear if alts and threads are exactly the same, but I think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's time too, and identity. Like, in this world, like Lou, for instance, she isn't just like one person like we would imagine. She's able to split into different people, recombine, go back and forth in time, different, travel the multiverse, but she still has a kind of new type of consistency. So I just felt like time was just another dimension for her, not like time for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It's that's like maybe what moving through time for an Neverborn is a very different thing than it is for us.
Yeah.
I think one thing that was at the on my mind at times was the vast distance of the past, that because maybe it has to do with the singularity, that because the movement towards Cool button was so extreme, it was such a direct charge up the parabola of the singularity, that there's almost more space in the past than there is in the future. That like the telos of the one is like approaching rapidly, and getting into when, and but like finding the past was very distant, very very challenging and hard. There's like more stuff in the past than there is in the future in some ways.
Yeah, well, they're constantly like mining and refactoring the past in this world, but then there's also all this new craziness. One of the things that we didn't really get to explore much in the story yet is like the average day-to-day life of people in this world, and is there that, like, who are they? Like, there's a scene with the hype machine, there's the beach and there's like people playing and stuff, right? But it's like, is that like a simulation that they were going through, or is that like a real population of people?
Yeah. I mean, it's like something we return to somewhat frequently in some ways, but we never got into like why they would do that. I mean, they are,
Yeah.
at least the Neverborn have this like higher purpose kind of, or they have this higher vocation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did seem like they had a fair amount of just like day-to-day routine, you know, and in a way I feel like that's like how you can tie it back to our own experience, is that like
Yeah.
we may have other higher causes that we're just not really all that aware of. But at the same time,
Yeah.
we're all, you know, we're calling Ted of Ted on our sim link, and you know, we've got our
Yeah.
like strange
Oh.
simulated abode that we live in, and you know, it's like you kind of
Yeah.
have to, and they kind of seemed like they had to exist in a time scale that was, you know, the mundane, so that they could carry out their like fractally buoyant actions that are much more important.
Great. Well, let's close it up, but I definitely want to do at least another one of these. I mean, there's so much material to talk about.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come.
Cool.
Well, send me the video when you can, and I'll come through it, and I'll take out any topics that we've talked about, and then we can just keep going until we lose steam. Be
Great.
really fun.
All right, man.
Awesome,
We'll
man.
schedule something over email for next week.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. All right. See ya.